Welcome back to Sense Space and this ongoing series, Christianity Beyond Itself. I'm really stoked and honored to be back with Matthew Segall. We had our first dialogue in summer of last year, and so about a year and a half almost transpired, and that was really a keystone dialogue for me in kicking off this series. It really felt like Matthew afforded me this space to really lay out some foundational pieces and clarify what this inquiry is about. We were just speaking a little bit about some of the cultural shifts that are occurring that we've both been tracking, and also maybe some of the shifts in the quality of conversation, the kind of spaces that we're participating in together. So with that, Matt, welcome back to Sense Space. And maybe we can kick off that, just sensing into the shifts that are occurring and how they've been showing up for each of us over the last year and a half.
Yeah, good to be back. I can't believe it's been a year since we last recorded our dialogue on Christianity Beyond Itself. I know you've been having a number of conversations with others. I have as well. I think I had a conversation with Brendan Graham Dempsey not long after the one that we had, that we titled something like Christ After Christianity. So like another attempt to name the conversation that's trying to happen. I mean, I think there's a tremendous cultural earthquake occurring in the tectonic plates of meaning that undergird our civilization are colliding, and something new is emerging that's still pretty hot magma, but there's some crust that's still heavy, and that's also, I think, fearful of that magma. Something like Christianity is this ancient tradition with various institutions, some of which are going closer to its origins than others, but I think the core of this movement that began about 2 millennia ago is wild, and it can't really be fully contained in an institution, though that it does, I think, need a communal container for sure. But I feel increasingly, whether it's church, state, the capitalist evangelical resonance machine that mixes church and market, that's William Connolly, the political theorist's term for it. There are ways in which institutional containment attempts to contain this Christ impulse, I feel, are buckling, but also trying to tighten their grip at the same time. And so all of a sudden it feels important, and a bit like trying to grab a live wire to even enter into this conversation. It's a real intense fray. So
Buckle up.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, how do you feel like things have shifted over the last year and a half?
Well, the piece that I wanted to name at this moment is that there's different revivals happening. It's been very curious, obviously, for me to see this occurring within myself, and then tracking it in this kind of liminal web space, this kind of culturally generative frontier that I've been following for many years. And then to see almost moments later, that wave really cresting much more broadly in the culture. But there's a significant difference in disposition and orientation, I think, between this kind of Christic philosophical orientation that senses there is something very new and quite beyond what has been before that needs to be mediated, that is not yet known, that needs to be unfolded, and that, as you say, points towards a Christ beyond Christianity. And then there is a very strong impulse to basically take up the sword of the crusader and just like grab that core energy of Christendom as a means of rerouting, stabilizing, fortifying Western culture and civilization, which seems to, like much of the rest of the world, be on the precipice of massive change. In some senses, in a state of decline that also feels interminable, feels like it can't be addressed through economic or cultural levels that are kind of higher on the stack. So yeah, feeling into that terrain and at a collective level. And then also in my own journey, I think I had a lot of experience rooting into Catholic Latin Mass, yes, Spanish Mass in Oaxaca, coming out of a big ayahuasca dieta that I had in Peru in April, which also featured quite a lot of Christ-related visions. And out of that, I actually found, okay, prayer is very, very important to me as a practice, and I'm, landing that more and more regularly. God is definitely at the center of the whole puzzle for me. And then after several months, probably 4 or 5 months of doing that quite regularly, I've noticed myself kind of drawing back a little bit again from that very regular. I was going to mass probably 3 times a week and learning the prayers and songs in Spanish and everything. And then just last month, I went to an amazing transpersonal psychology conference here in Oaxaca, which was in many ways an environment in which Christianity was not particularly present or presenced. Still a lot of alienation in the air. But the retreat was incredible because the people holding it were doing this profound syncretic work of bringing together transpersonal psychology and pre-Hispanic Mexican ritual, dance, Temazcal sweat lodge. And ultimately, I was able to sit a peyote ceremony with a grandmother and family from the Huichol indigenous community from further north in Mexico. And that whole experience just reawakened for me the reality that these indigenous traditions, the Huichol with their peyote medicine and the Shipibos with ayahuasca, they have a completely authentic and profound grammar for connecting with the divine. Like, they have a channel to God, and I have zero doubt in my mind because of the blistering, sort of eviscerating beauty that I've encountered in those ceremonies. That for me is as real as it gets. So between all of those things, again, I'm thinking about the mediation of Christianity and the indigenous plant medicine, which also requires contending with that legacy of colonialism and la conquista.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned this this term crusade, becoming a crusader, which can historically has meant a lot of different things. Um, when you, I mean, the type of pluralism that you are embodying, I think, is such a crucial part of Christianity if it is to have a future, because I think the most striking thing about the life of Jesus and the power that is expressed in the living out of uh, his ministry and the crucifixion and all, the most striking thing about it is the lack of violence associated with it, but the tremendous power that is nonetheless unleashed. And it's a power of persuasion, of love, um, that's beyond any cultural difference, gender difference, racial difference. It embraces all human beings. And I think there's something about the history of the religion that formed around the deed and deeds of Jesus Christ that I think started to, well, mistake the finger for the moon in a way and defend the cultural forms instead of the teachings that informed those forms originally, because um, there's no reason to feel threatened by the ways that other people's contact the divine as a Christian. You know, if you really do accept the oneness of God, but a oneness that is relationship, and so it's like a triune sort of deal, then what else could other peoples be worshiping and communing with and partaking in? I mean, it's got to be the same God. It's just the need for semantic flexibility to be able to fluidly interpret and reinterpret how one articulates and languages and institutionalizes something that cannot be articulated or languaged or institutionalized. So we live with that paradox. But yeah, the pluralism, the plurality of traditions that you're able to move through. I mean, I very much resonate with that, and it's a tension that I try to hold and try to explain how it's still coherent, that I could feel at home in a relationship with Christ and also be a committed spiritual and religious pluralist and see that I have no need to convert anyone, and in fact enjoy being converted by others in a way that only enriches my sense of the love of this being Christ. So I think you're setting an example for how this work can be done, because for the most part, whether it's a secular Western person or person in the global South who hasn't already been converted, by this religion that came to that region with conquistadors, with the threat of the sword if you don't convert. For a Christian to then show up and not try to push it on you, I think is a novel sort of experience. And it takes, it'll take a generation or two before that sense of fear of the Christian coming in, even if just to judge, not necessarily to forcefully seek to convert, for that fear to wear off. So that's kind of the task ahead of sincere followers of Christ who are trying to move beyond some of the institutional forms that Christianity has taken. It's like there's a lot to overcome there. And at the same time, I think in the global South, some of the most potent and rejuvenating expressions of Christianity in the last several centuries have taken root. So um, those who were colonized and adopted this religion, and this happened in the U.S. or in the colonies with, I think, when Christianity was introduced into enslaved populations, like they really got it. And, they weren't allowed to read parts of the Bible that might suggest that slavery was wrong or that slaves should revolt. But there's a way in which this tradition, this story about the deeds of Christ, takes root in the oppressed, even when the oppressors are the ones bringing that religion to the oppressed. It takes root in the oppressed, and they actually are able to tap more deeply into its essence than the colonizers who originally forced their religion on them. So that itself, I think, is a signal that this impulse can't be contained by any doctrines or priesthood or authorities. So it's a good sign.
Yeah, it's a fascinating tension between like I want to say like a universal Christ and a universalizing Christ, something like that, like a sense of a divinity that, like, as I've said a few times now, like if Christ is really true, then you should be able to encounter him in the ayahuasca ceremony or in India or whatever is that context of most spiritual otherness.
Mm-hmm.
But trusting God like necessitates that the true expression, true relationship with God could arise or be clarified through those other contexts as well. But there's something against a very, very subtle difference there with the universalizing, which is like, I've got it, and now I just need to I need for other people to get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is very curious, like the sense of like you almost need that peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding, in order to not have that urgency to evangelize or to not save people, or to not spread this, because times are apocalyptic, and they certainly have been before. But right now, the pot is definitely stirring and cooking. There's some end of the world energy afoot.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, there's this Hegelian move that distinguishes between abstract universality and concrete universality, where concrete universality isn't the opposite of particularity. It includes the particular. It includes plurality, and transcends it also. But that transcendence isn't taking flight from the plurality, but a recognition that the multiplicity is, in some sense, woven together by spirit, and that spirit speaks every tongue available to human beings. It can't be captured by Latin or English or any other language. It's this miracle of Pentecost, right? Being able to speak in any tongue and like preach in the local vernacular of the people that you're visiting just by grace. It's funny that a lot of people on psychedelics report being able to all of a sudden speak languages they've never studied before. It's like we tap into this transpersonal field. I've never experienced that, um, but yeah, just that whether you go in that sort of transpersonal direction or not, being able to recognize the multilingual nature of the word. It speaks all languages and none, in a sense. So it transcends and includes all the cultural orientations one might take to this mystery. And yet at the same time, I mean, if someone's willing to talk to me about Christ, who is not a Christian, you know, I won't suppress the sense that for me what's true, and even to qualify it with for me, it feels like maybe that's softening it too much, but that there is something truly universal about this deed which was done. But like, yeah, we live in apocalyptic times, but in some sense the deed was already done. Like whatever, and we can talk about what salvation means, but it's happened. It's done. And I really resonate with like the Church Father Origen's interpretation of what it means that deed is done, that like all of us have been saved by this deed. And it might take a while. There's like maybe some reincarnation, multiple lifetimes to fully accept that you've been saved, but you know, it's done, and you don't need to be Christian for that to be true. And so for me, in the background of any interreligious or interspiritual or intercultural dialogue is that sense that like we all already exist in that field of love. So I don't need to convert anybody. Like, who am I to think that I have to do anything to bring about that saving power? Like, it's already done. You know, and so that's like the core of my faith on some level. And it's, if you're really settled into that type of faith, it doesn't bother you if someone else has a different way of talking about their relationship to the divine. I still feel like I can translate that into the word, into this deed of incarnation. Like, it still makes sense in the terms in which I have felt it, you know, even if I'm in ceremony with people who honor the living powers of the rainforest, or the serpent, or the jaguar, or Quetzalcoatl, or like, you know, these are all, I think, among the infinite faces of the divine. So
Thank you for saying that. That's a very nourishing cosmic realization. Especially what you said about multiple lifetimes. That sensibility, like the soul might have to go through a really vast journey in order to kind of realize that at base, at bottom level. I was talking with my family after Dia de los Muertos. I was in the U.S. My sister and her husband and a Mexican friend, and I was telling them I had just written a piece about death and dying before you die, and that kind of thing. And the friend said something like, this now group of people that very frequently talk about death, which is, normal. Most people don't talk about death very often, but that sense of um, like the imagination that she expressed about death was just like everything going black forever. And it reminded me that I used to think that way. Like that is kind of like the baseline atheist reality of death. Um, and the consequence of that, all things happening in their own time, but at the same time, the consequence of that relationship to death shapes a great deal of how we move through life
Yeah.
and hold space with one another and what choices we make. And to me, it's like relationship with death, ergo relationship with God, relationship with divinity is the foundation of mental health. Any sense of mental health that is kind of like separated from that more existential basis of death is I don't know, like short-term band-aid maybe.
Hmm.
It's not getting to the base, and it makes it harder, I think, also to connect. Like I feel in some way the limitations of connection in relationships in family and so on for me at base the fact that there's not a shared sensibility around um, a sacred reality beyond this one, that gives some peace or understanding around death. Like not having that really, it is such an important foundation to share.
Yeah.
Although, of course, if you're anchored in that, you can kind of witness and be present with people wherever they are in a way that's profoundly supportive as well. Um, I guess what I'm saying is it would be a great blessing for more people on the earth at this time to feel the peace of God.
Yeah. No, imagining death as the end when it all goes black is so suffocating. I don't think we fully appreciate the extent to which that sort of a default way of relating to death in a secular materialist culture is it's literally taking the air out of our capacity to l- live meaningful lives together. I mean, it to believe that when you die, everything just goes black and it's as if you never even existed. It's just the end of your consciousness. It blows out and you're gone. I think to there's an unconscious effect that has, even if you're a more or less seemingly well integrated, balanced person who believes something like that. Um, the ethical consequences are uh, severe, I think, for that, and the what motivates you, how you seek, what meaning can you get from life after you've accepted that? I mean, only pleasure and maybe a sense of like tragic tragic beauty. I mean, maybe. Um, but I think like what are the economic consequences of that? Like we live lives, I would say, where the motivation would be to live a life of selfishness and experience as much pleasure and comfort and convenience while you can, and who cares about the future? Like it literally, it just doesn't matter anymore. So it's just there's so much of contemporary nihilism is a spin-off of that relationship to death, I think.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah, these bodies are the vessels of our that afford us the ability to commune with each other on earth. And it's not that we want to go to the opposite extreme and say, oh, it's all about what happens after we die. We want to go to the afterlife and be in heaven. And so there's a balance to be struck here. And I mean, reincarnation used to be, uh, there's a Jewish, ancient Jewish conception of it. Many of the church fathers affirmed some form of it. Pythagoreans affirmed it. It's got a pretty ancient pedigree, and I think it actually strikes the right balance here, because even if we do reincarnate on some level in some way, death is still a tragic thing, because these bodily vessels are uh, the the mode of our relation, the means by which we relate, the means by which spirit can relate to itself. Like we need to take on embodied forms, and when we die, something is lost, and we transform. And I think that the nature of that transformation is, as far as I can intuit, feel into, imagine. I don't know anything about this, but when I feel into it, the nature of that transformation is, well, it's transfiguring, such that I have a suspicion that after death, when my like soul, spiritual nature sort of leaves the decaying physical body behind, that my very sense of what it was to be alive as Matt will be different. It's like some massive inversion of value, where it's like, not that this life didn't matter at all, but it has a deep significance, but almost not for me. It's like each of our individual lives in each body is, we're trying to learn something on behalf of the species. And when we die, it's like, I mean, one possibility is that it's like we're giving back what we've learned to the soul of humanity, the spirit of humanity, which can be a heavenly or a hellish experience, or some mix, depending on how we lived, you know? But imagine believing your entire life and shaping your values around this idea that death is the end, and then you die and realize it's not, and the feeling of like, oh, whoops. So I don't know. I'm not trying to make like a Pascal's wager thing here, but I do think of, so Ian McGilchrist develops his own version of Pascal's wager, which is like a participatory spin on it. And if the nature of the divine isn't just, as Pascal thought, like it exists and has a nature independent of whatever human beings may believe or do, but if God is this participatory reality, then how we comport ourselves toward that mystery, towards that reality, actually shapes and changes it. And so to the extent that we believe or don't believe in the divine becomes that much more real or illusory. So it's a vision of the divine where the further actualization of its reality requires our participation. So it's like the McGilchrist wager is that the divine has this reverberative nature to it, and that it is our love for that makes it real in a fully ontological sense. It's not just, we believe and act as if it's, but no, our love, our sense of participating in that divine life is what intensifies the divine life. To the extent that we, and the culture at large, recedes from that, the divine life is diminished. So there's some responsibility we have here. Faith isn't just aligning with what already exists, whether or not we're faithful, but the faith itself is the realization of this divine presence. And so, yeah, how we relate to death in light of that, I think, is really, really important. Again, not to transcend or be in a rush to get up and out of our earthly coexistence, but to fully appreciate the importance of our earthly coexistence, I think we need to honor the vessels, the bodily vessels that allow us to commune, but also the spirit that flows through in between us that doesn't die with the body. And again, I don't claim to have knowledge about any of this, but it's what my experience of being an embodied human being suggests to me, and what feels like most supportive of a virtuous life while embodied is to take something like, reincarnation, and that there's one human being that we are all facets of, and that each human life is a day in the life of that being, that anthropos, that we all contribute to or diminish, depending on how we live and how we die.
Yeah. It kind of begs the question, how far can this earthly realm that we are in go in either direction as well? Like, insofar as people become more and more devoid of divine reality, how devoid of divine reality can the physical plane become? And this was very much the thrust, I think, of some of the best of Jordan Peterson's work. Really, was a sense of like hell is something that we can create on earth, and paradise is all like there's a vector, there's a directionality we can move in both collectively. But yeah, the question on the positive side for me is a very fascinating one. Like how much better can my experience become? How much more continuity of participation in the reverberation of the divine song could I experience? Which is a very delightful musical possibility. And been obviously stewarding this Resonant Man initiative for the last year. Some weeks ago, I serendipitously found this great book by, I think it's Imrat Khan. He's a Sufi musician from the 1800s, but a philosopher as well. And the whole book is about the musicality of life. And it seems to me that this is somehow critical to like what we're exploring here around Christianity beyond itself has to somehow for me be landed in metaphors of resonance. And there's something obviously very universal about those as well. But it's like, how much can I open my vessel? And at the same time, how much can I tune my vessel to receive that divine music? And there's a sense there in which, like, if you can tune yourself to the divine song, then you will pretty assuredly be able to hear it when it's coming true, no matter where it's coming from. And the whole landscape of disconnection from our own divinity, disconnection from spirit, and broadly collective and ancestral trauma can be effectively reconceptualized as that which kind of disconnects us from the musicality of life, that which has us like out of the music of being.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a musical ontology seems it's not just an analogy. It's like reality is music, creation is musical, and it is enduring order requires resonance. And you know, that enduring order can become stale, and you need improvisation, to stir things up and complexify the song. And it's always a choir. There are always multiple voices that we feel our way forward by achieving, ever more complex harmonies out of that choir of different voices. And so like you mentioned Sufism, and I think about the civilizational conflict, between Islam and the West, and how much of that is a sort of, there's a mythic overlay on that, and then there's the economic reality of fossil fuel, and you've got bin Salman visiting the White House this past week, and just the levels of duplicity involved, where somehow the only bridge between Christianity and Islam at present, where there is the semblance of peace, is mediated by money, by the capitalist economy. But right below that, right below the surface of that sort of pseudo religion of capitalism, is this deep seeming conflict that is not just religious, it's political, and it's economic, and I struggle with this one, like, for there to be, and throw Judaism in there too, that these three big religions that share so much, share almost everything in a way, but have some core doctrinal differences and historical rifts, and like how we push through that, or what the lure is that would help guide us through a conflict at this scale, is not clear to me. Because so much of the forms that Christianity has taken in the West, in the modern West, emphasize sort of like freedom of individual conscience, at least in some cases. And I'm sure there are examples of streams of thought like that in Islam, but there's this sense in which relating to God through submission feels different than, and there's all sorts of language in the Quran about Allah relating to human beings as like slaves, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a metaphor. But that sense of submission to the divine, I think, is different from this notion of incarnation, where we're called to become divine. And again, I think one of the other common denominators philosophically that bridges Islam and Christianity is the Platonic, Neoplatonic tradition, and this idea of theurgy. And I know that there are plenty of streams within Islamic philosophy that would affirm a kind of theurgy, and that overcoming that sense of the divine as a big other that we're always going to be separated from and needing to submit to, versus this idea that God needs us to embody our own divine image in a way, and have that more participatory sense of the human divine relationship. So yeah, I guess the way through maybe is to tap into these deeper mystical strains, to lean on the bridges that are already there through the Platonic tradition. But I continue to struggle to find words and concrete means of like really addressing this conflict. I know you mentioned this in the email to invite us into conversation, so I wonder if there's more context you wanted to share about it. But
Well, I appreciate you bringing it in, and I feel the same way. It's really a massive fissure for me where that produces incoherence, and I haven't been able to pull together my responses. It's also the starting point of my journey in terms of just being drawn to this question of Islam in the West as an undergraduate and postgrad. When I try and zoom out to like, okay, what's the divine telos in all of this? I can say maybe the challenge that Islam is generating to Western society has a positive effect in that it catalyzes it's not possible in the long term, I think, for secular, godless, commercial Western culture and Islamic fundamentalism in minority status to coexist in harmony. And so we're feeling the tension of that, but something that is catalyzed out of that is, in a way, Islam reawakens Christianity.
mm-hmm.
But we're also seeing that it does that as a kind of political and cultural necessity. And even for me, as somebody who's pretty far out there on the, spearheading this Christianity beyond itself notion, and like spent years and years and years practicing and advocating dialogue as a medium of cultural transformation. Even in me, I feel it in my body. It's not something that comes here, but I feel it here at like in my embodied masculinity. There is a sense that the Islam can only be mediated with from a position of strength, which is not to say seeking conflict or seeking to persuade the other. But my best sense, based on my observational experience of Islam and the dispositional differences, is that there is like this whole thing that I'm mostly concerned about and critical of, which is this whole like memeplex of restore and revive Western culture and civilization and kind of like bring back the high European medieval nobility. And at the fringe is basically like, let's rewrite the Crusades as like a noble venture. There is a seed of truth in that I feel. And I struggle a lot to find my way in. Even though I know at a conceptual level that those pathways are there, I still have not found my way into those kind of Sufi and Neoplatonic portals yet in my own journey. And I do think there is a core difference around the sanctity of personal inquiry, the sanctity of free inquiry, free expression, personal and particular relationship to the divine does not feel shed, at least with the disposition of Islam I've encountered, which is epistemically closed at the level of disposition, just to say all of the answers are already included. it's the fundamentalist position that shows up in any fundamentalist religious context. The answers are already there. So if I don't know the answer, I need to seek authority from somebody who does know the answer within my own tradition. And that is a firewall against the kind of mutually transformative mediation and exploration that I think we're both interested in. And and so insofar as people are moving from that position of deep and absolute fundamental faith in a structure that's kind of epistemically closed, then actually trying to enter into a kind of good faith open inquiry with that, what you'll find is basically the dialogue is a strategic game to figure out how to convert you. And there isn't that same sense of like, I don't need to or want to convert, because Dawa is like one of the core 5 precepts, like promoting, sharing, and propagating the faith is fundamental. And yeah, as you say, some of that stuff around servants of God and, masters be kind to your slaves, slaves be, good servants to your masters. Absolutely right. That shows up in the Old Testament in some places too, but there's very few Christians and Jews arguing that is kind of like perennial and unchallenged word of God for all time, whereas the majority of Islam is. So it's a lot more difficult to then extract and analogize those passages.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is a problem, as you're saying, it's with fundamentalist interpretations of Islam, but equally so of Christianity. But I think in the Christian West has gone through a Reformation and a Counter-Reformation and this process of secularization, and it's almost as though. So I think that process of what Luther does what Martin Luther did has such so many ramifications, not only in the context of religion, but Luther standing up to the authority of the church in the coming centuries empowered so many people politically to stand up against the authority of governments, and then eventually this idea of individualism takes root in the West, where it's like, nobody else can tell me what to believe. I, will make up my own meaning. And I think it's like the secular West, modern West, almost like zoomed past where secularization would have been a healthy process and went just full bore into a kind of disenchanted individualist relativism, and maybe the positive role that Islam can play, with the sense that there's more in Islamic civilizations and nations at present. There's plenty of modernization which has occurred because clearly there's plenty of participation in the global capitalist economy, and there have been attempts for communism to take root in places like Iran, which was squelched. But there's something about Sharia that's, as far as I understand it, closer to a communist vision of how wealth should be distributed in a society. And there's a sense of still what Eric Voegelin would call a compact cosmology, where religion, politics, and economics haven't fully differentiated in the way that they have in the West. And they haven't just differentiated in the West, they've dissociated. And then after that dissociation, there are all sorts of unholy alliances that have been forged between evangelicals, the capitalism in the U.S. context. But still, I think there's a way in which Islam's maintenance of this more intimate, compact integration of the political, the economic, and the spiritual or religious, I think it provides a necessary pull to challenge this modern Western sense of the complete dissociation of these things. And I think this dissociation is so unhealthy in the West. It's why we're seeing this rush toward Christian nationalism and all of these absurd, idolatrous, nonsense ideas. In my opinion, because we're so confused, we've just lost the ground of value and the axiology by which we could make sense of, well, what even is an economy for? Just for profit? Well, we've only isolated the economy from our sense of the divine and the meaning of life because of a kind of pervasive materialism where we think when we die, it's the end. And so we may as well just try to accumulate as much as we can while we're still alive. And so all these pathologies have spun out of the dissociation of these three value spheres. And Islam, in many cases, still has a tighter sense of their connection. And I feel like there's a middle ground, a new kind of integration, not to return the West to a medieval sense of, pre-capitalist, feudal, whatever. Like, it's good that even Marx said that capitalism was good for getting us out of a feudal situation. But yeah, I feel like the West has just zoomed past the point where secularization could have been beneficial, and Islamic civilization can help us find balance again by providing this contrast of what we've lost. Yeah, I mean, this is a very complicated issue, and hopefully I've articulated it clearly enough that you get some sense of what I mean. But I think we do have something to learn. The Christian left has something to learn from Islam.
100%. And that resonates with my initial proposition. I think whenever venturing into this dialogue, there's just such a intense field of projection that I certainly, I've participated and attempted these dialogues in numerous contexts, recorded and unrecorded over the last 8 years or so, periodically, and every time I feel the energy of it, and it makes it such that I almost feel like, oh, there's a requirement for me to put out all of these qualifiers in order to dispel all of these baseline negative assumptions and projections that are going to be thrown in. Mm-hmm. But at foundation, yeah, that's where I got to. I started to feel during my study that Islam is a mirror that we have to look through in the West in order to see ourselves. And it's a challenge for us to encounter a faith that is so comprehensive and unquestioned, compared to a society where faith evaporates, where prayer does not exist. To have prayer instantiated not just once a week or once a day, but 5 times in a day is really deep. And it seems very natural that you have this kind of theo-political economic situation when you have literally all of the men in the community gathering in the same place every week, if not every single day. It is that core communal incubator. Mm-hmm. So it's this. It has to be dialogued with. There has to be a seeking for the divine within it, which I still to this day find quite challenging. but I do feel that that has to come from a position of robustness. Um,
Mm.
and that's the tricky line. That's a very tricky line to walk. Like um, how to be muscular and flexible civilizationally at the same time. You know, how
Mm.
to be very skillful and firm in boundaries and also open. And where I see us right now is more like we want to either be muscular, but we don't know how to be flexible in that muscularity, or we're like doing this kind of like Christian welcome all ye masses unto me, but then totally lacking foresight of like what happens now in 20 years time that you've invited all of these people from a very tribal society to come into your society, which doesn't actually have the capacity to meaningfully integrate.
Mm.
Um, and now Europe is swinging the other way. Like we are having a complete reversal and rebalancing of the open arms that Germany and other countries enacted 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's shifting a great deal.
Hmm. Yeah. No, the question of immigration is a whole other can of worms that I hadn't even. I mean, obviously, I think about that a lot, but so far in talking about the West and Islam, I hadn't even sort of had that um, top of mind. But yeah, it's interesting hearing the Pope Leo, talk about immigration policies in the U.S. under Trump, and um, I think taking a pretty solid position in terms of expressing the Catholic position on it while also respecting the laws of the U.S. I mean, he's not saying the U.S. should have open borders, but he is saying that human beings should be treated with respect, and that they're not at present being treated with respect by immigrations and customs enforcement. But I wonder what Pope Leo would say. I mean, he's an American, right? But what would he say about immigration in Europe and how uh, a country which historically has been Christian should deal with that number of refugees? And many of them are refugees and migrants because of wars started by the US or the West.
Yeah.
Um,
We have dirty hands, or at least the CIA has dirty hands in a lot of this, and that has to be included in the picture
mm,
of why things are such a mess.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but that's
but
not the only reason they're a mess, and
yeah,
that's where
mm,
a lot of Islamic collective consciousness is right now. I think is
mm,
basically things would be really great, and we would be in this position of civilizational ascendance
mm,
if it wasn't for Jews, America, all of these pernicious satanic forces undermining us.
yeah.
Um,
No, I mean, my fear is that this vengeful instinct, the desire for revenge, ends up getting the upper hand here, which will very quickly tighten the spiral, of violence that we're already in.
in the
But
European context, or
in the European context, but also just going back to the post World War II situation and the need for oil to fuel the Western war machine, and that leading to different treaties and alliances with the Saudis and others, and um, the Iraq wars, and we support dictators and then decide we don't want to support them anymore, and then um, trying to intervene in the internal affairs of all of these Gulf states and Middle Eastern countries, and then of course the support of Israel um, in the post World War II period by Britain and the U.S. And I think all of that has built up so much resentment, and um, how that resentment gets de-escalated to a point where we can live in peace and mutual respect is not at all clear. How we could even go about beginning to repair that breach of trust. But I like what you said a few minutes ago about the Islam as a mirror for the West, because I think back to the times of the Crusades, 11th century, 13th century, right? And then when the West was threatened in the 1400s by an incursion from the East. Nicholas of Cusa was a cardinal, and he imagined a sort of interreligious dialogue between Christians and Muslims, and began trying to find ways of not canceling the differences between these two spiritual traditions and paths and understandings of the divine, but to begin creating a new language together by which a bridge could be established for mutual understanding, but not assimilation of one to the other. But it's at that time, beginning of the modern period and the transition into modern nation states and everything, that the West actually came to understand itself as the West in opposition to Islam. And so that idea of the mirror, it's like the West wouldn't be the West without that sense of an other that's similar enough that we can recognize ourselves in it as a mirror, but different enough that we want to resist assimilation. We owe so much to one another for our own sense of who we are. And then that itself feels like the basis of at least the foundations for a bridge, that we need each other. Our very difference defines us as civilizations, right? That mirroring, like as if we can't fully see ourselves without that mirror the other provides.
I mean, a very interesting way of extrapolating that would be men and women as well. Like we cannot know ourselves as male, as female, except really through that sense of encounter with that which is different from ourselves. And so, yeah, a tricky analogy to apply though is I don't know that there's that much intermarrying taking place, and it's usually quite conditional.
Right. And the whole question of the place of women, I mean, there's a lot of, part of the resurgence of conversions to Christianity in the West is this attempt at cultural recovery of a kind of patriarchal masculinity and gender relations and all the rest. And so there's almost like a rush to revert back to a kind of pre-modern, pre-secular set of values around that in the West, which is exactly what I would want to preserve, that makes the West unique, and that the impact of Christianity to encourage us to take individual souls as the locus of value at a level deeper than what is your gender, what is your race, what is your whatever. That so many people are converting to Christianity to recover something that seems to me to be not Christian at all, is worrying. It's worrisome to me because I think one of the major problems of Islam politically is around the treatment of women and the total lack of any sense of equality between men and women. And, there's a whole nother conversation we could have about extremes that feminism goes to, uh, that I think move into a conception of what equality means that can be unrealistic. We have different bodies, we have different uh, we're basically a different species. I mean, whatever the human is beyond gender and sexuality is a mysterious kind of wholeness, but none of us as men or as women embodies that fully, and that's why we need each other as mirrors, and that's why the conjunction of these poles is what gives rise to new life. Um, so we're not the same. To be equal doesn't mean that we're the same, but it does mean that women get to decide whether they want to get pregnant. They get to decide whether they want to drive a car. They have rights like any man does. And I think in so many Islamic societies, there's just they're very far from recognizing that, and that's a problem. But again, in so many Western countries, there's a backslide from that, and there's this resurgent conservatism that wants to revert back to that pre-modern sense of a patriarchal type of gender dynamic where men are in charge and women should just obey. And I think that's
Yeah.
a movement backward.
There's definitely a kind of pubescent energy around that. And I do sense that is more associated with the swing to orthodoxy in particular, especially given how patriarchal like Russia and these kind of keystone, very orthodox societies are. But again, it's something that came up in a men's group. One of like the elders in our men's circle was talking about his time in Morocco and how absolutely defined the gender roles were in that society, but also in that definedness that there was a givenness. And we can, what we're facing now as my friend O.G. Rose often talks about, is just the dissolution and loss of givens around masculinity and femininity being a key one. And so, again, Islam presents this context in which what it is to be as a man amongst men isn't this kind of like abstract, distant question. It is simply to show up in the mosque, and there you will be among the young men and the older men, separate from women. And I think we're engaged in an effort also to conscientiously think that through as well. Like, how do we honor togetherness and honor separateness?
Yeah.
Without that total backslide that you pointed to.
Yeah, that's a challenging one. The end of givenness, the way O.G. Rose phrases that, I think there's a way in which individual rights and freedom can become individualism as an ideology where men and women shirk the responsibility that comes with the givenness of the body you're born into. The fact that women give birth puts them in a position of vulnerability that's quite different than the embodied experience of men. And that, of course, is going to have social and cultural repercussions. So again, it's like equality under the law, let's say, and equality in terms of economic opportunities and whatnot, I think is important. But that doesn't mean that equality is not sameness.
There you go. Problem solved. We can just rock those two. We'd be pretty much there. Yeah.
Yeah. But I get it. Like, for women who don't want to be defined as potential mothers and don't want to feel like failures because they didn't have children or don't want children. I get that. Like, and so there needs to be a way of like holding this gently. And I don't know, I mean, short of trying to remember prior lives when I maybe was not male, I, you know, and just through empathy with women, like I can't fully understand what it would be like um, to have that form of gendered givenness, you know. Um, but I do see in some more extreme ideological forms of feminism that become almost like a hatred of men and then also a hatred of one's own body, like the desire not to be a woman in the sense that I don't want to bleed. I don't want to have to worry about getting pregnant. Like, give me the pill. Like, I just want to be uh, an individual in the sense of not having that degree of vulnerability that men don't have. Not that we're vulnerable in other ways, but we don't have to become the host to another organism, you know? Um,
Mm.
and so how do we maintain that sense of gender difference while also affording uh, dignity and a certain degree of self-determination to women? I think is an ongoing uh, challenge conversation. But again, I feel like the modern West has overshot the value of some degree of secularization, and we need to kind of come back a little bit to recognize there is a sacred given that requires that we check our desire for certain forms of individual freedom and expression, that it's not just a free for all. Like, um, and that's a big ask of the West. And again, I think it's something that we need to and can learn from Islamic culture. It's like, I think the male female, man woman analogy for Islam and the Christian West kind of works because then you start to wonder, okay, well, that means that we need to have a child. Or in other words, what does the future look like
Wow.
when we're able to learn
Yeah.
from each other what the other lacks, you know?
Yeah. How do we procreate? Yeah, really well put. I think there's a historical there's a lot of historical shortcut taking, I feel, in the patriarchy discourse, which is basically like take a big circle and draw around almost everything that happened before and say that thing is patriarchy and bad, um, rather than like
Mm.
kind of thinking and living, imaginally living through those different historical levels and layers, and the different struggles of men and women through both.
Mm.
But yeah, I also think this actually, building on what you said about how Islam could potentially remind us of that. I also feel like our indigenousness is really key here. And my experience of what I'll call my indigenousness, coming back, like coming into contact with sacred embodied reality, for me has been one in which uh, children and pregnant women just naturally have this radiant sacredness, and the kind of combination of a protection instinct, but also a sense of like a reverence of like, wow, like what the fuck else should I be doing with my life if not being toward that possibility? And that
Mm.
to me, I think, is something that is just in a way native um, to men, insofar as they have a initiatory incubator of some kind. Like, I'm not saying for everyone, of course, but generally speaking, through those initiatory things, there's a shift, and it's also a death of that kind of individualist orientation as well. And surely there's a female equivalent to that. And so I guess to circle around in a very squiggly way to one other question I really wanted to bring in today was around the proper relationship between church, not specifically like Christian as it exists, but church as like the religious gathered body, and
Yeah.
and initiatory ceremony, and like how you envision an emerging balance between the two, or if you even feel that's necessary. But I sense there is some kind of dialogue between those two as well. And everyday church and Sunday church cannot be a world-changing, mystical, God bomb plant medicine journey. So those are kind of, or fasting and being in the wilderness for 10 days or whatever it is. But it seems to me that the rejuvenation of Western culture and what will actually beyond us participating in this collective dialogue, like what will allow us to download or like upload from our own indigenousness the answers to these collective problems is partly held within rejuvenating that sort of balance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I was thinking if in the Buddhist context, you could think of Buddha, Sangha, and Dharma as these sort of three different spheres of contact with reality, almost like in grammatical terms, like first person, second person, and third person. Buddha is, it's this idea of intimate familiarity with enlightenment, awakening, emptiness as an individual person, as a subject. You have encountered that directly for yourself. You've touched Buddha nature. But Sangha is the community life that you come in to then support others and be supported yourself in the maintenance of that realization and the translation of that realization into some sort of a cultural container and shared life. And then Dharma would be just relating to that divine mystery that is not inside me, is not simply what we create as a community together, but what encompasses both and remains beyond and transcends any particular cultural container we might try to create, and that remains mysterious to me in my most mystical encounters. And so like keeping all three of these in mind, I think, and in heart, is an important part of the spiritual path. Because, if you only have church life and community, even if it's a loving community, supportive with prayers and songs and doctrinal forms and moral precepts that like make sense, if you have all of that, but you haven't had that inner encounter and that sense of being at the most intimate level of your own subjectivity torn open by an encounter with the ground of being, with the divine, then all of that cultural stuff, all those words, can just become a cage. As if like,
or a safety net.
Yeah, a safety net. Floaties in the pool, like you haven't actually You haven't taken that dive to the bottom and had to hold your breath and like confront the mystery of your own existence. You're just totally protected from that. And, I think like Carl Jung would talk about the importance of the church to protect people from the unconscious, because it's a wild place, and you need those institutional structures so people can maintain some semblance of sanity, because not everyone is ready to, initiation is risky. Like some people don't make it. They just, in that encounter with the ground of being, like the ego pops and can't reform, And so it's like if you don't have any of the cultural containment and community of interpretation, and you just go head first into the direct subjective encounter with the mystery, you might not make it out. You might become disintegrated and dismembered and not reassembled, right? So these things need to hang together. But I think for the most part, what's happened is that like the New Age, spiritual but not religious folks who really go deep end up kind of spinning out a little bit and maybe becoming a bit narcissistic and overemphasizing the subjective freedom, nothing is given pole of things, whereas traditionally more fundamentalist religious communities have lacked that individual experience dimension and are totally just, let's conform to what, the book says, what the pastor says, and just follow the rules. And so it's like another example of these two different communities or cultural movements that really need each other. And it's like we need the spiritual depths that you as an individual have to confront yourself, but we also need that sense of a community container and a shared understanding to bring back what is the real value in those individual deep dives, and all in service to this third person sense of the divine as beyond all of it, that like no community and no individual can ever fully claim. And so initiation is super important, but it's like, yeah, it's the hero's journey, right? You go out, you have that initiatory experience, and then you come back to the community. And I feel like different sectors of the culture nowadays are doing parts of it, but we really need to integrate them. Religion needs spirituality. Spirituality needs religion. So it's an important question, important dynamic. And I'm really excited by this burgeoning psychedelic form of Christianity, because I think it can hold these elements together in a way that I haven't seen elsewhere.
Yeah, that is a profound source of hope for me as well. And so when you're talking about Pentecostal experiences in psychedelic context, I raised that with my ex-monk ayahuasca maestro, and he talked about a natural Pentecost taking place, and that's how he describes like the Holy Spirit is working through these plants to help refoster that connection with the divine. So yeah, this has been an incredible dialogue as always, Matt, and helped me to mirror and map and complexify my own understanding, and hopefully of some fruit to people listening. I am also going to recommend people check out my debut album with Jordan Bates, Christ Ayahuasca, coming out hopefully in the next month or two,
Awesome.
which will be an artistic expression of this synthesis. And I also just, the other thing I mentioned in my email, I went back on your YouTube channel and I saw like that you had been doing this for a very, very long, like seemed like since you were 18 years old, you'd been posting these philosophical videos, and it was very, very striking for me to see someone who's really stuck with it and to see just how long you've been been at this, and also that you haven't aged a day. So yeah,
Well,
I don't know
yeah,
if you have any comment on that, but it was remarkable to me to see how long you've been in this online dialogue game.
yeah. Time is a weird thing. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that it's been 20 years. I mean, back then YouTube was not yet owned by Google, and it was a pretty small eclectic community. And I just started posting philosophy videos because my college roommate moved out, graduated 6 months before me, and we used to stay up late, take bong rips and talk about death and consciousness and politics. And then all of a sudden he was gone, and there's a vacuum, and I found YouTube where people were talking about ideas from all over the world, and just dove into it. And it became, vlogging for me, when engaging that medium in a philosophical and theological and spiritual way. It almost became a form of prayer, but a different form of prayer that's unique to the social media uh, technosphere, where it's public prayer in a way. Instead of me sort of privately trying to commune with the divine, it's a form of private in a way. I, be alone in my home, often late at night, posting these videos, but speaking into a shared field of intention and attention. And I just found it tremendously empowering, not only intellectually, but spiritually, and it's continued to be so. I really have a hunger for these types of conversations, and being able to talk to you, with you, and hear from you, but also to know that others will hear this and make of it something that maybe you and I don't even notice while we're engaged in the conversation, but then
Mm.
others see it and reflect that back. And so it really fosters this collective intelligence that I find of tremendous value. So that's why I've been doing it for 2 decades.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. And beautiful also to be a kind of arc that's continued from college student to college professor, you know? Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Matt, for joining me. And no doubt to be continued, and I'll continue to track your dialogues as well, and your essays, insofar as I ready to stretch my mind to beyond the limits to grasp the domains you're going into. But thoroughly recommend everybody to check out your channel and Substack as well. And I'll drop those notes below. And yeah, thank you for listening, everybody. Peace.
Thanks, Jacob.